Welcome back to another episode of the Your Two Best Friends podcast with your co-hosts Annalise and myself, Danielle Hanlon. We are back with part 2 of our episode talking about all things dating, our experiences dating in purity culture in a Christian community, and our recommendations, our advice, and our wisdom that we've gleaned to share with you viewers that we hope will encourage you and help you date in a healthy way. So we're going to continue on with that conversation and just jump right back in.
I also think that it would be really good for us to share maybe some ways that, looking back now, we have had experience dating. We have had experience dating who is now our husband. Well, we're not married to the same person. Our husbands. And I don't think I could have phrased that any weirder, but I think it'd be good if we just shared maybe some things that we have learned from our experiences of dating, and maybe things that we wish we would have known before we had started dating, and maybe when we were younger as well, what we wish we would have known.
Yeah, this is a great question because you look back and you're always like, cringe city. I feel like every time I think of dating, I get uncomfortable because I'm like, oh, I did not know how to date in a healthy way. And I think some things I wish I did differently was one, I think when I was looking at Christians, I mentioned before, I was definitely more focused on the outward than the inward earlier in dating. Mm-hmm. And it was like, they have to be in ministry. Otherwise, like, are they a real Christian? Which is not true. But then focusing on that and maybe ignoring other relational red flags because I'm like, oh, they serve in this capacity at church. This will just override everything. And ignoring areas of their character that I would not have wanted in a spouse, or maybe things that they needed to grow in before, they could get married, and that would be a person for someone else. But for me, would not have been someone that I wanted to be in a serious relationship with, but I would ignore things for the sake of what they looked like on the outside. The other thing was not really enjoying dating. I think it's not a sin to enjoy dating or going on dates or this exciting area of your life. I think that I didn't ever have like a healthy view of it. It was either way more important in my life than it should have been, or I was trying to suppress it and be like, I will never talk to a man again in my life. And there was no like in between of, I'm just happy and healthy and I'm looking for my husband and I'm having fun getting to know people and going on dates and meeting new people and figuring out someone, like you said, that I really just enjoy hanging out with. Connor and I always talk about that. We would like when we started dating, we were so young. We were 19 and 20, or maybe we were 20 and 21, but we both weren't the people we are now. And so if we were dating now, it would look so different than it did when we were 20 and 21 years old. And so I think I would have probably focused on having a healthier idea of dating at that time, maybe figuring out what that was. But we're still in that phase, I think, in a lot of Christian circles where it's like, this is really murky water. What does this mean? People are still promoting purity culture. People are now on the other side of the spectrum. People in the middle are like, where are we supposed to go? Like, what are we supposed to do? So I think I would have just focused on enjoying the process a little more instead of either being on one end or the other of I'm never getting married or this person will be my husband.
Yeah. I think for me, looking back, I focused so much on the spiritual connection that sometimes I would not pay attention to maybe the lack of connection in other areas. And so, as I was sharing before, like, we're holistic beings. And so I learned in relationship with my husband that I feel attraction to him spiritually and physically and emotionally. And so I was pushing so much the spiritual that often. I was then maybe dating people that I didn't have connections with in other areas, and the only thing that we could talk about was the Lord, which is that's really good. That's really good to talk about Jesus, and that's a good foundation. But there wasn't much more that we could build like up from there. And so yeah, I think that that's something that I wish I would have known, that it's okay to also find someone that you find physically attractive and someone that you find emotionally attractive and that you have more connection with than just the spiritual side of things. And then I was also thinking about this question and kind of going back even further in my dating experiences. And when I was way younger, right before going into college, dating someone, and I feel like I really changed my personality for this person. They were more assertive, and so I took on more of a passive role, and that is not who I am. That is I like didn't talk a ton. I remember this person saying that, well, I guess I'm just calling them out, but I remember this person saying that their favorite thing about me was that I was submissive. And that's number one, a really odd comment to give someone, especially someone who's not your wife. And so I just, yeah, anyway, I just wasn't myself in that relationship.
Mm,
And so I think it's really important and something that I would share to um like my younger self, that like be yourself. Don't care so much about this person liking you that you change to be like who you think that person wants you to be, but instead, yeah, be yourself. See if you actually like that person. Be more concerned with that. Is this
mm.
person good? Do I actually enjoy this human? Instead of oh, do they like me? Like how can I be more so someone that this person would like?
Yeah, I think it reminded me of something I also thought during that phase of my life of, well, it's better to be with this person than to be alone.
Yeah.
And I think there's different phases in my life where I didn't want marriage or whatever else, but even during then, if I was talking to someone in that talking stage or whatever, it was like, oh, well, there's these red flags, but what if I never find someone better, quote unquote? Or what
Yeah.
if I never find someone else? And I think it kept me, number one, hung up on people for much longer. This idea of scarcity. I was listening
Mhm.
to Christy McClellan. She writes a lot of Bible studies, and she was talking about the concept of scarcity being only introduced when sin came into the world. It was not originally in the Garden of Eden when God created it. Scarcity is a result of the fall, and that's in a lot of other aspects of our life. But it also made me think of the way I view dating, of like, oh my gosh, it felt like there were three Christian men. They were all at the school. Only one of them was interested in missions. We were all fighting for the one. And that it was better to settle for something than to be alone,
Mhm.
or to, yeah, I don't really know what I was afraid of. But it kept
Yeah.
me hung up emotionally on people that I shouldn't have been hung up on, or continuing to either go on dates or pursue something with people I shouldn't have, just
Mhm.
because of this overwhelming fear of not having someone.
Yeah.
So I
That's
don't know if
so
you
real.
experienced that.
Yeah, I definitely did. I remember after one of those guys ended things with me feeling like no one this attractive will ever date me again. That was my big thing. Like, I know there's good Christian guys out there, but are they attractive? I don't think I'll be attracted to another Christian guy. And so that it totally was this like scarcity mindset of like being afraid to end things with someone even though I knew it wasn't healthy. But would I find someone better in the future? I don't know. And so there is this trust that you have to have like in the Lord, that he has good plans for you. And also this is a big world. There's a lot of people in it. And so, yeah, I really thought I was going to go to college and meet my husband, just like how my parents did, one of my sisters did. And so graduating and
Just an
not,
intercultural studies degree and no
yeah,
MRS degree.
yeah, it was scary. But turns out there were Christians in Michigan. Who knew? And so I've met my husband, and he is both spiritual and attractive. So it all worked out. But yeah, I do remember that's a good point. This scarcity mentality of like, well, I have to settle with this person because who knows if there's anything better after this.
Yeah, or that being alone is the worst thing that can happen to you
Right.
because it says something about you, like you're not attractive or you're not
Yeah.
spiritually mature things. I think it's kind of with our idolization of marriage a little bit that
Mhm.
if you're single, it's something about you
Right.
and that you'd rather like bypass standards or things that you have to just be with somebody.
Mhm.
And I even think of ways I allowed myself to be treated in other relationships because I was just, like you said, being different. I just wanted someone to like me. I liked
Mhm.
the idea of them liking me more than I actually liked who that person was.
Mhm.
And you allow yourself to be treated differently, you have standards, and I think people can come along and change your view on life, but I think there are some basic standards that you want to be treated well and loved well, and
Right.
that I was just letting be thrown out the window for the sake of being real, having someone to text 24/7
Mhm.
because that's what it was when I was
Yeah.
this age. So it's kind of like being alone was obviously better than that, but for some reason it's in our mind. I think it does, does play into the idolization of marriage and things in other things in church culture of like it was just better to me that I wasn't alone.
So we have talked a lot about dating. And so, Danielle, what do you think, like, how do you know if you're ready to date? Do you ever feel ready to date? Maybe you can speak from your own experience, but what do you think about that idea of being ready?
I think it's a dual-sided question because I think that you'll never be quote unquote ready. I
Mhm.
do think there are times you're not ready, however.
Yeah.
So let me explain. I think that times when you're not ready, there's pervasive sin that would be more harmful in a close relationship than solving it on your own. Maybe things like lust or sexual sin, maybe addictions in that area. I
Mhm.
don't think that you can't have a healthy relationship and still be being sanctified from the Lord in those areas, or you might slip up, or
Mhm.
you are taking active steps to solve that. I think
Mhm.
sometimes it's just harder in a relationship with another person because you can hurt somebody else. And
Yeah.
so that's a big burden to carry. And sometimes it makes finding freedom in those areas a lot more difficult. So I think that would be a circumstance. I think times in your life where you're not humble enough to admit your mistakes and shortcomings,
Mhm.
relationships are going to expose the good, the bad, and the ugly of you. Marriage is like a mirror. I mean, you see every way that you're selfish. You see every way that you want to get your own way or what you want, or sins that you could keep under wraps around people you see 3 times a year, but someone lives with you every single day and they know. And so
Mhm.
it's not gonna you're never gonna be perfect. So let's start there. There's never gonna be I'm perfect, I'm ready to date, the day is up, the curtain is open, the show will go on. But I think that if you're not ready to be humble enough to see your shortcomings, want to do the work to fix them, that's really hard in a relationship, both for you and another person. So those are things that I would just recommend that would be reasons, hey, maybe I just need to do a little more work with the Lord before
Mhm.
I think about getting in a really serious relationship. I don't think that means you can't date. There's plenty of people that have probably been experiencing those things and their relationship, they were really able to turn to the Lord. They have a very healthy relationship in marriage now. I think personally that would be something that would make me feel like, oh, I want to take a little more time.
Yeah. And I think it's also honoring to the person you're dating that you work on some of those things before you get into a relationship, because that can be difficult dating someone who is in the process of really changing a lot or working through some of those habitual sins, because then, as you were saying, it can hurt that partner in the relationship. And I would add to that list of some things maybe that you would want to work through would be low self-esteem. That I think if you are struggling with that, entering into a relationship can put too much pressure on that other person to be your source of like esteem.
Mm.
And that ultimately is something that should be worked out between you and the Lord. I do think it's also important, like this concept of dating yourself, getting to know yourself. What do you actually want in a partner? Know your personality and your giftings and your traits so that you can see what would complement you well. And that's hard to do when you don't really know yourself. And also, as you get older, I think you're still figuring out who you are, but you definitely know yourself more than when you are younger. I can look back at the type of people that I was dating when I was like, well, dating quote unquote, but when I was younger, like 18, and who I now am married to, and it's very different. And so I think in part that is because I have grown and I see more about myself and the kind of traits and qualities I want in a person. And so there is something to understanding yourself, and that can help the dating process go more smoothly.
Mhm. Yeah, and like Annalise said, things that put pressure on a relationship just make it more difficult for you. And
Mhm.
sometimes they are harder to solve. And if you get into a relationship and end up marrying that person, then you're working on that the whole time. And you're focusing more on, you're always going to be changing and working on yourself for sure. But when you're dating and getting ready to be married and getting married, you also want to grow and work together. And so it kind of divides that focus of like way more on, maybe low self esteem, jealousy is really, really hard if that's something you really struggle with
Mhm.
in your life. Like we mentioned, maybe problems with lust and sexual sin. I think if the root of it is thinking, if I get in a relationship, a healthy relationship, that will go away, then that's
Mhm.
the problem. Like I mentioned before, we know that's something a lot of people struggle with. And so you may still be in process. I don't think you can't date if you're still in that
Yeah.
process, but coming into it with a mindset of this will fix it. This will fix my lust problem. Getting married and
Mhm.
having sex will fix all these issues. That's something that really needs to be worked out before you get dating, because it's not about sex. Those sins are about other things, and there's other root causes, and some of them might be self-esteem and
Mhm.
other things like that. And so, um, to wrap it up, do we think that there's ever a for sure ready? No, because some people, everyone's different, and you are going to be willing to work on different things in a relationship than other people. I think we both agree that you have to want to do it for yourself. So you could have worked on yourself, your whole life, but you did it to be ready for someone else. That's just also as unhealthy as someone who's maybe just starting working through it, but you know, it's for themselves. So I
Mhm.
think being able to do it for you and the Lord, and your relationship with God being those motivations, I think you could be ready at any time if that's your focus. And I don't think anything will stop you. So, Annalise, what is some advice that we would give to someone who's trying to date, or maybe they're currently in the process of dating? Maybe there's something in our relationships that we liked that we can recommend here, some advice, or something that you wished you did in your relationship that would have helped.
Yeah. I think ultimately what we were just saying, put your relationship with God first, right? Learn your relationship with Him, figure out your relationship in part to yourself, and that will be a benefit to then looking at your relationships with other people. And then I would also say if you're wanting to date, uh, put yourself out there. I know that this is maybe that can be touchy for certain people who have been actively putting themselves out there and have not found someone that they want to date or someone to marry. But maybe this is for an individual who's kind of just longing for this, but has not actively tried to find a relationship. Do that. Put yourself out there. It's like a job, right?
Yes.
We have to apply for jobs, and it's a little bit unrealistic to graduate from college and just think that your dream job is going to find you without you putting in any work. And so put yourself out there and maybe you'll find your dream guy, you know?
Your forever
So,
someone. What show
yeah.
says that? I don't know why it
Uh,
said your forever someone. But with that, some people might be some stinkers. You might come
yeah.
across some people that you're like, this really makes me not want to date. Or I'm
Mhm.
losing faith that there's a Christian guy or girl out there for me.
Yeah.
Don't let it discourage you. Go to small groups, join events. You
Mhm.
do Jobs will reject you, and there's companies you don't want to work for in the same way there's
Mhm.
people you don't want to date. You
Yeah.
only need one. You don't
Mhm.
have to like 10 or 15 people that you've gone on dates with. You only have to like one. So I know it's so much harder in this digital age where you need apps and it's so different and it's so easy to get discouraged. But if we're going to encourage you, you only have to like one of them. And that's
Yeah.
okay.
Mhm. And then lastly, I would say being a Christian and being nice are the bare minimum. And
Mm,
so I hear a
that's
lot of
good.
people saying that, like when you're asked to describe the person they're dating, like, oh, he's really nice and he's a Christian. And okay, and what else, right? Is he teachable? Like, is he able to make mistakes and apologize and seek wisdom from other people? Is he generous? Or is he interested in your friends? Is he interested in knowing your family? Do the closest people to you like him? There is more to being there is oh my gosh, I can't speak. There is more to dating and marriage than being a Christian and nice. It's really setting the bar low. And so yeah, you can expect more than that. You can expect more than just a nice Christian person.
That is so good, Annalise, because God is so good that we don't have to settle for the bare minimum.
Mhm.
Like you said, how do they deal with their anger? How do they deal with temptation? How do
Mhm.
they pursue the Lord? Are they interested in being a disciple or are they just interested in going to church on Sunday?
Mhm.
And like we both have said, don't change who you are and your values to accommodate someone else. Maybe they are attractive. Maybe they are nice and a Christian, but you get old. You do. You get old in the rest of your life. You spend a lot of time with this person. They are possibly a parent to your children. There's so many more important things than, like Annalie said, being nice and being a Christian. That is the bare minimum. I know it feels like the maximum when it feels like your pool of dating is smaller, but you set yourself up for success for a healthy marriage if you're looking for these things. I think that being single and that being part of your journey, the gift of singleness, is more beautiful and fruitful and rewarding and healthy than just getting married because this person seemed to check off the bare minimum of boxes and you weren't finding anyone else. Um, and you know, Annalise and I have been through this, so we're not saying this at you. Like, we've been there. We've seen where it felt like, oh my goodness, there's no one to date. But pray about it, bring it to the Lord, and don't settle. God, I think of the story of Abraham and Sarah, where God promised Abraham and Sarah a son, and they're like 100 years old, just about, and they're like, we have no kids. Like, our bodies are, they literally call Abraham's body like decaying and just like this old guy. And Sarah's like, okay, just sleep with my servant and have a son through her, and we'll claim that child as my own. You know, you get ahead of this. We will go in front of God and outside of God's plan. And that was settling for something that wasn't God's plan for their life and ended up being super harmful to the kid that they produced, to Hagar, the servant, to Abraham's relationship with his child that he had with Hagar, and to his relationship with Sarah. And Sarah's relationship with Hagar, it was a whole mess. So don't try to get ahead of God. He will not make you settle for the bare minimum. Other advice that I wished I had known, and some things that we did, was seeking wisdom and guidance of other spiritually mature people who have a healthy view of marriage. So maybe they're down the road in marriage. Maybe they are just really strong Christians living for the Lord. Seek their wisdom and guidance, and have accountability for maybe those
Mhm.
same people. Maybe people that aren't your friends and will just be like, oh, it's fine. People that are like, hey, these are our boundaries. We cross them. We just want to be accountable with you because we want to honor each other in dating. That's as simple as it has to be. You don't have to run through a list of all the ways you cross boundaries and everything else, but having people who are wise and who care about the two of you together to be accountable and to get
Mhm.
wisdom and guidance from.
I do think one thing that you've mentioned that's really important is the part about those individuals having a healthy view of marriage. I know that there was a season where I was, I guess, kind of being mentored by someone and was going through some things with a person that I was dating. And this individual I was being mentored by kind of had a bitter view towards men. And so when I would bring things to her, the response was always like, "We'll dump him." Like, you should not be in that relationship, which maybe I shouldn't have been, but she was very quick to just say like, "No, like you shouldn't be in that relationship." And later on, dating someone else who struggled with some of the same problems, but I saw wisdom from another couple who was very godly and had a healthy view of marriage, and they were able to help me see this in a new way, and that certain things are not like the unpardonable sin,
Mm.
that even though individuals maybe in their past have struggled in different ways sexually, or have struggled with pornography, that was like such a big hurdle for me to get over in relationships. And so the second round of asking for wisdom from people, these individuals taught me to be much more gracious in my response to the individuals I was dating, and that it wasn't so cut and dry. If they're struggling with this, then you have to dump them, but rather like, what are the steps that they're taking, and are they taking this seriously? Are they seeking accountability? Who in their life are they talking to about this? And so it was just a very different response that I received. And so I totally, yes, go to people who are spiritually mature and just make sure that they want they like the idea of marriage. Like that they're
Yeah.
not going to just, no matter what, just say like, no, you should
Kick
end
them to
this.
the curb.
Yeah.
I think having good community around you is always important when you're dating, to hold you accountable, to be friends with you. Life is better lived in community. A relationship that makes you isolate borders oftentimes on an abusive
Mhm.
relationship. So being able to have a robust and healthy community, obviously there's some situations where maybe you move and that's not the case, or you don't know anyone. But I think relationships being in beautiful community is so healthy and makes it more fun. Like double dating is fun. Being in community with
Mhm.
people who are in the same um, phase of life as you is really fun. Then something that was huge for my husband and I that we would really recommend is figure out how to build relational intimacy outside of sex. So when you're dating and you're not having sex, it's the perfect training ground. How else do you build physical intimacy? My husband, when we were dating, would give me like a foot massage all the time. And that was like something that I was just like, wow, like acts of service are one of my love languages. And it was so beautiful because it was a way we could like be touching, or that was not sexual, or holding hands, or being able to cuddle without it immediately having it to turn into a makeout session or something like that. That type of physical intimacy is going to be so important. And emotional intimacy. Emotional intimacy, number one, is going to be so foundational to having good marital sex. Not just marital sex, good marital sex. We need emotional intimacy for it. And that is something that maybe we bypass if we are not setting boundaries and going for the physical stuff right away, we don't build this foundation of emotional intimacy and being able to be vulnerable with each other. The only way we feel intimate and vulnerable is when we're naked or doing something in that way, because we are vulnerable when we're having sex. That's like one of our most vulnerable states. It's like your body and, very personal things. And so emotional intimacy also feels like that. And when you don't build emotional intimacy, then oftentimes couples can fall into the trap of only feeling intimacy in your relationship in sex. And that's
Mm-hmm.
where it can become very unhealthy and harmful, because you're not feeling emotionally fulfilled. Your emotional needs aren't being met. You're feeling used, or you don't feel loved, or there's a lot of cracks that can get in a relationship, or you maybe don't solve conflict because your way of solving conflict is having sex, and it kind of puts a band-aid over a bullet hole, and you're not actually getting to deeper reasons of why people are hurt or taking accountability for the action, things like that. So dating's
Mm-hmm.
a great time to develop these things when you're practicing purity, because you can't have sex. So it's a great time to establish all these habits, which my husband and I were so thankful that we did, because then in marriage, sex was just the icing on top of the cake. We talk about that all the time. We are best friends, my husband and I. We think each other is so funny. We have so much fun together. And sex was just the icing on top of the cake. And we don't think we would have had that if we didn't build these things during dating. So, Annalise, we have discussed ways we think about dating, ways we've, seen it play out in Christian culture, our recommendations. We've covered so much in these 2 episodes. What
Mm-hmm.
are some resources that we can end with that would help people that are dating? Besides, obviously, this podcast, what
Yeah.
are some other resources that will equip people to date well and feel confident?
Yeah, so while I was dating Alec, I found 2 different podcasts that helped me in that process. And one was, I think it's called Love and Relationships by Deborah Filetta. And she also has a website that has different blog posts on it called True Love Dates, which is funny. It's like a play on True Love Waits. But she is a Christian, and she's either a counselor or a psychologist. It's been a little bit because I've been married for 2 years. I haven't really been listening to her podcast, but it was really good resource in framing different topics and different things that would come up while we were dating. And yeah, it was just very helpful. So I'd really recommend that. And then also, this one might be more if you're engaged, and definitely if you're newly married, but there is a podcast called Dear Young Married Couple. Dear Young Married Couple. And that one is also very good, touches on some of those different topics that you might even experience while you're dating, but especially when you're engaged and newly married. And yeah, so that one has continued to be helpful, but was also helpful in that season. But how about you? What have been some good resources that you have come across when it comes to dating?
Yeah, I think they're 2 great books. So when I was in college, I read Love That Lasts by Jeff Bethke. And this was a really good book on relationships. Someone gave it to me, and I was like, why would I read a weird relationship book? But it was about, I think, their marriage, and it does talk about dating, but I was like, why would I even read this? I'm not even dating anyone right now. But it was really, really good in setting the foundation for how I even thought about marriage. Loveology by John Mark Comer is another great one. This is another one that isn't specifically about dating. It does talk about dating, but he breaks it down from starting at marriage and working backwards to talk about dating, about like, if we stop at what the end goal of dating is getting married and having a healthy marriage and living that out and bringing us closer to the Lord in that way, then how does that affect how we view love and all sorts of other things? Another great resource is our friend Jenny, who we've had on this podcast, on the Head to Heart podcast. I was actually on her podcast talking about dating. We have 2 episodes out now talking about that, because we were both seeing a lot of struggles in maybe friends that we had that were still single, or things where people like we talked about, are in this murky in between of not really knowing how to date. So a lot of her viewers had asked lots of questions and we answered those the best we can. So I'll link those below if you're really interested in the nitty gritty of how to date and be in an early relationship. So I'm sure there's plenty of other resources, but these are the ones that Annalise and I really recommend. And we are so thankful that you've joined us for another episode of the Your Two Best Friends podcast. We will see you next week.